Hey guys, this is me, and today we're going to talk about counter arguments. And we're going to go through how you lay them out, why you might use them, etc. Let's start off with our objectives and let me get out of the way here. Objectives to understand the process of making counter argument and the special considerations that you're going to have, and to be able to construct counter arguments for essays and speeches, and specifically AP argumentation essays. All right, get out of the way. When you write an academic essay, you make an argument. You have a thesis statement or a major claim, and you support that thesis statement or major claim, right? When you counter argue, you consider a possible argument against your thesis or claim, or some aspect of your reasoning, a secondary claim, or something like that. Now, you'll notice I am using thesis and claim interchangeably. Modern AP, as well as the uh, Utah core standards and the national common core standards, which Utah doesn't use, but they all use the language of claim and not thesis. Thesis is kind of an old Latin word, but for this, your main claim is your thesis, and so I use them interchangeably so it's clear. And your secondary claims are your arguments for your thesis. All right. So when you counter argue, you have to kind of come up with a counter thesis, right? What should it include or how to include it? Let me get out of the way again. This is like being in class. I have to constantly move around so that you can see the board. Let's go back to the next section. All right. A counter argument in an essay has two stages. You turn against your argument to challenge it, then you reaffirm your argument. Think of it like dancing. You kind of pivot and then pivot back, right? Um, and that's how you set it up. So it sounds simple, but it can be a little harder to set up than you think. Brainstorming for possible opposing positions is the first thing you should do, and you should probably do this when you brainstorm, your regular argument. Ask these three questions when you're trying to counter argue. Who might disagree with my position? So remember your audience and remember who in your audience might object to your position. Why might they object to it? Now, don't try to strawman them and paint them in a corner for wanting to object. Instead, hear what good reasons would they have to object. Steel man the argument. Make it as strong as you can against you. What reasons would people have for disagreeing with me? What weaknesses in the argument, points of view, nuances, things of consideration that I need to deal with? And what support would they have? All right, what would support that opposing argument? So you basically construct the opposite argument, the bizarro world argument, right? And I have a source for that, by the way. John Mack and John Mack's authors of Composition Everyday Life, where we get that from. All right, the turn against. Introduce the turn against with phrases like, one might object here that, it may seem that, it's true that, admittedly, of course. Then state your case against yourself as briefly but as clearly as possible, pointing to the evidence where possible and doing so charitably. Remember, even though you're going to try to defeat this, you're not trying to make this argument look bad. If you do that, you're guilty of strawmanning, and it'll hurt your grade. It's also just a bad move. Turn back. You return to your own argument, which must involve careful reasoning, and this is one of those places where you can get that sophistication point in the AP test that dogs so many of you. It's really hard to get otherwise. In reasoning about the counter argument, you may show why it is mistaken or acknowledge that it is valid or plausible, but suggest why it is less important. Usually the second's the better way to go, actually, unless the counter argument is actually mistaken. Basic transition words you can use to get here. But yet, however, nevertheless, still. Although, just remember, it is usually not considered good form to start a paragraph with a conjunction, even though you can sort of start a sentence that way. Because it indicates that your paragraph is not coherent. I will get back to that on another day. So if you do your turn in a separate paragraph, don't start it with however. Say something like, it can be seen, comma, however, comma, something like that. All right. Steps to proving a strong counter argument. Steps to provide a strong counter argument. the opponents. Introduce your opponent's argument. Decide whether it is weak, strong, true, or false. And remember, when you can, it is better to use a strong argument, because when you defeat it, you've defeated a better form of the argument. Provide counter arguments and counter evidence. So give their arguments and give their evidence as best as you can. We've already gone over this, but this is important. All right. Give you an example. Introduce your opponent's argument. People were healthier in the past. Argument 2. People suffer from stress. All right. So decide whether or not it's weak, strong, true, or false. Argument 1. More pollution. More cases of cancer. Argument 2. More stress. More depression. Provide counter arguments and counter evidence. More pollution, more cases of cancer are caused, now. More stress, more depression we have today. Phrases for giving a counter argument. When your opponent's argument is true, but yours is better, you should do the following. We'll get to the. We go back there. Okay. While it is true that, but, there is some truth to the argument that, however. It is true that, however. So you're often going to have complex and compound sentences here, okay? My head floats bound. When your opponent's argument is true, or might be true, but you're not sure, you might just say this. It may be true that, but, even if it is true that, however, even if, blah, but blah. All right? And this is a good thing to remember, because sometimes the argument may not be something you can prove, or you don't know how to prove it. You don't know if their counter argument's true. You're just going to grant it truth and still try to show how that has flaws. When your opponent's argument is false, you just state it as false. It is not true that. People may claim, but in fact, that's how you do it. Very simple. As a writer, it is your job to account for positions that oppose your claims and supports. And you need to do this as a means of credibility. Like when we were talking about the Aristotelian triangle, this is a point of ethos. Your ethos. You're showing your credibility because you are dismantling your opponent's argument, but granting where it might be right, or where it's not stupid, or where it might need to be considered seriously. This is also a point where you really can get that sophistication point, because it shows that you can think about something in a multi-leveled way. All right. So let me get a more specific example. And let me move my face. There we go. All right. A claim / thesis that more Americans are choosing low-carb diets because the media promotes low-carb diets as a new way to get a skinnier body. Counter arguments. Some Americans don't watch television commercials because they own DVD-R units, such as TiVo. Remember when we had DVD-R units? But most Americans are exposed to other forms of advertisements, magnets, magazines, newspapers, highways, and billboards. Where to put the counter argument? You can put it in as part of your introduction before your thesis, as part of your attention grabber and bridge. That's a risky place to do it, though. You can do it as a section or paragraph just after your introduction. So you can get to it pretty early, or you can do it right before your conclusion. All right. As a quick move within a paragraph, you can create a counter argument not from your main idea, but to a sub idea, or something you're arguing, one of your subpoints. So maybe your counter argument isn't to your main claim or your thesis, but to one of your secondary claims or your support arguments, and then you put your counter argument within that paragraph. All right. It is true that counter arguments enrich argumentative writing. However, adding a weak counter argument or overdoing it causes worse results. So if you strawman, because that's what providing a weak counter argument is strawmanning your opponent, you've committed a logical fallacy, and you're not going to gain any sophistication points. You're probably going to lose organization and support points, actually. So it can be risky if you don't have a good counter argument. If you're going to include it, you need to include a good one. All right, and that is it, guys. We are done. All right, I hope you found this helpful and can make some counter arguments in your next essay.